Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in each of our lives, sometimes late in the stillness of night, sometimes amid the chaos of the day, when we sense something stirring deep within us. A name, a face, a burden that doesn't quite belong to us, yet weighs on us as if it were our own. That, my friends, is no coincidence. That is divine intention. God is whispering their name in your heart. Are you listening? Let us begin by understanding this. God does not always shout. In fact, he rarely does. Divine guidance does not usually come with flashing lights or trumpet blasts. More often than not, it arrives in the form of a quiet thought, a subtle nudge, a silent knowing, and yes, a whisper. I urge you to train your inner ear. Set aside time each day to be still. Create space to hear. Develop spiritual sensitivity, for in the quiet, God speaks the loudest, and in your obedience, heaven rejoices. God is whispering their name in your heart, not by accident, not for curiosity, but for purpose. Are you listening? When we think of divine callings or messages from God, many envision dramatic events, burning bushes, parting seas, visions in the sky. And while such events are recorded in sacred texts for specific moments in history, the vast majority of divine communication comes not through spectacle, but through stillness. It is important to understand that God's voice, more often than not, arrives as a whisper, a gentle, almost imperceptible nudge within the human spirit. This whisper is not vague or random. It is deeply personal and uniquely tailored to each soul. God, being the author of all life, knows every nuance of who you are, your thoughts, your fears, your potential, and your purpose. And so when he calls, he does not do so with generalities. He calls by name. He calls in ways that resonate with your particular wiring, your emotional language, your story. The problem is not that God is silent. It is that we often do not know how to hear him in the manner he chooses to speak. There's an ancient story in the scriptures of the prophet Elijah, who expected to find God in a mighty wind, an earthquake, or fire, but God was not in any of these. Instead, Elijah encountered God in a still, small voice. That moment was not just about Elijah. It was a lesson for all of us. God's whisper is intentional. It draws us into intimacy. It requires attentiveness. It separates the casual hearer from the committed listener. In today's world, our senses are bombarded with noise, social media, non-stop notifications, urgent deadlines, endless conversations. Amid all this, the whisper of God can easily be drowned out, but it is still there, persistent yet patient. God does not force himself upon us. He invites. And when he whispers someone's name into your heart, whether a friend you've lost touch with, a neighbor, or even a stranger you encountered briefly, it is not to stir idle curiosity. It is a personal request crafted for you. Such a moment is sacred. It is God involving you in his redemptive plan. Perhaps he is calling you to intercede, to reach out, to be a vessel of comfort or clarity for that individual. But the message is subtle, never coercive, never loud. This is because God honors your free will, your spiritual maturity, and your readiness to respond. Developing the ability to recognize this kind of calling requires practice. It involves cultivating stillness, learning to discern between inner distractions and divine direction. It demands that we become students of our own souls, watching how and when God moves in us. The whisper is not less real because it is quiet. In fact, its quietness is what gives it power. It forces us to lean in, to tune out the world, and to turn our full attention toward the sacred. In a world driven by intellect and external achievement, the heart is often underestimated. It is commonly reduced to a symbol of emotion or sentimentality, something soft, poetic, or romantic. But in spiritual and theological understanding, the heart is far more than that. It is a sanctuary, a place of divine encounter, a sacred space where heaven and humanity meet. From ancient texts to modern spiritual teachings, the heart is consistently portrayed as the seat of deep wisdom, moral discernment, and divine communication. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." This verse is not speaking of the physical organ alone, but of the innermost part of our being, the place where our thoughts, desires, and spirit converge. In essence, the heart is the command center of the soul. When God whispers someone's name into your heart, he is not merely planting a passing thought. He is placing something sacred into the deepest part of who you are. He is trusting you with a divine deposit, a burden, a name, a soul, and he chooses the heart because it is designed to carry such weight. The mind may analyze, the body may act, but the heart is where purpose is born and sustained. This is why the condition of the heart matters. If the heart is cluttered with bitterness, distraction, ego, or fear, it becomes difficult to discern what is truly divine. The sacred signal gets lost in the static. But when the heart is quieted, humbled, and open, it becomes a clear channel for God's whispers. A pure heart can sense what the mind cannot grasp and respond with a depth that transcends logic. Furthermore, your heart is not just a receiving station, it is a dwelling place. The Spirit of God desires to abide in the heart, not as a guest, but as a resident. The whispers you hear in your heart are not simply divine suggestions, they are invitations to partnership. When someone's name arises in your heart, you are being asked to join in God's care for that person. You are being invited into intercession, empathy, or action, not as a distant observer, but as an engaged participant in the sacred work of love. Understanding your heart as a sacred space changes the way you live. It compels you to be intentional about what you allow into it, what you meditate on, what you nurture, and what you ignore. You begin to see your heart not as your own possession, but as a vessel, a holy ground, where the divine leaves fingerprints. To treat your heart as sacred is to acknowledge that God speaks there, stirs there, and even weeps there. And when he whispers someone's name into it, he's not just informing you, he's inviting you. Listening is often mistaken for a passive activity, something we do while waiting for our turn to speak, or simply absorbing sounds without thought. But when it comes to spiritual matters, especially in discerning the voice of God, listening is far more than hearing. It is an active, intentional, and deeply engaged posture of the soul. It is not just a skill of the ear, but a discipline of the heart. In our fast-paced, noise-saturated world, true listening is becoming a lost art. We are trained to respond quickly, to multitask, to consume content in rapid succession, but divine whispers cannot compete with the chaos of constant input. They are subtle, delicate, and often require stillness before they can be perceived. God does not compete for volume, he waits for our attention. Therefore, the ability to listen spiritually is something that must be developed, cultivated over time with care and effort. Spiritual listening begins with stillness. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness is not merely the absence of noise, but the quieting of the inner life, the worries, the assumptions, the running thoughts that dominate our mental landscape. In stillness, we train ourselves to wait, to become aware, to tune our inner ear to a different frequency, one not of the world, but of the spirit. Listening also requires discernment. Not every thought that enters the mind is divine, and not every feeling that stirs the heart is holy. Discernment allows us to sift the sacred from the superficial. It teaches us to recognize the patterns of God's voice, the tone of love, the call to peace, the push toward righteousness. God's voice never shames, never confuses, and never contradicts his nature. The more familiar we become with his character through prayer, scripture, and reflection, the more clearly we can identify his whispers amid the noise. Humility is another essential component. To truly listen, we must let go of the need to control the conversation. We must be willing to hear something unexpected, something that challenges our comfort, redirects our plans, or asks more of us than we had intended to give. God does not always speak what we want to hear, but he always speaks what we need to hear. Humble listening makes room for transformation. And finally, spiritual listening is incomplete without obedience. Listening that does not lead to action is not true listening. It is spiritual procrastination. When God whispers someone's name into your heart, he is not just informing you, he is commissioning you. You are being invited to pray, to reach out, to give, to serve, or to simply hold space for that person in your spirit. Listening must move us. It must bring about change. Both in us and through us, listening then is not a momentary act, but a lifestyle. It is a skill honed through practice, sharpened by discernment, and perfected through obedience. It is how we participate in the divine conversation already happening around us if we are quiet enough to hear it. In the divine architecture of life, God often chooses to work through people. While he could intervene directly in every situation, his most consistent method of reaching the world is by placing people on assignment. Ordinary individuals with willing hearts who respond to a divine whisper. What this means is both humbling and profound. You may be the answer to someone's prayer. Consider this. Every day, countless people cry out in desperation. Some pray for healing, for direction, for encouragement, or simply for a sign that they are not alone. While we often assume these prayers will be answered through a miracle or an angelic visitation, more often than not, the response comes through another person, someone listening, someone obedient, someone sensitive to God's leading. That someone might be you. When God whispers a name into your heart, it could be because someone somewhere has cried out and God is moving through you to meet that need. You may be prompted to text someone at just the right moment, to offer a word of encouragement, to check in, to give, or to serve. And you may never fully know the impact of your obedience on that person's life. But rest assured, God's timing is never random, and neither are his whispers. This is where the idea of sacred responsibility comes into play. When we ignore these promptings, dismissing them as random thoughts or emotional impulses, we may be missing divine opportunities. Not every whisper is grand or dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as a quiet urge to reach out to a friend or a tug in your heart to pray for a stranger. But even simple acts, when done in obedience, can carry eternal significance. Moreover, when we begin to see ourselves not just as individuals navigating life, but as vessels through which God can flow, our daily existence becomes sacred. The mundane is transformed. Every conversation becomes a possible mission. Every interaction holds the potential to be a divine appointment. In this light, our lives take on new meaning, not because of fame, power, or accomplishment, but because we are aligned with the heart of God for others. This truth also invites us to walk in humility. Being the answer to someone's prayer doesn't elevate us. It deepens our dependence on God. We become stewards of grace, not sources of it. And as we obey, we also become more deeply connected to the body of humanity, seeing that our lives are not isolated, but intricately woven into a larger story. So when a name enters your heart uninvited, or a face comes to mind without warning, do not brush it aside. Pause, pray, reach out. You might be the very person someone pleaded for in their darkest hour. You might be the reminder that God has not forgotten them. And you may never know how deeply your response mattered, but heaven knows. Ladies and gentlemen, we have journeyed through the quiet corridors of divine communication, where God does not shout but whispers, not in chaos, but in stillness. Not to the crowd, but to the heart. We have learnt that when God places someone's name within you, it is not a fleeting thought. It is a sacred call, a divine summons, subtle yet intentional. It is deeply personal, entrusted to the sacred space of your heart, where his voice gently stirs the waters of compassion, obedience, and purpose. And yet, to hear this whisper is not automatic. It requires something of you. It demands the discipline of spiritual listening, a posture of humility, stillness, and discernment. You must train your soul to hear what the noise of this world tries to drown out, because in that quiet space, God may be calling you, not for your sake alone, but for someone else's. Someone who is crying out, someone who feels unseen, someone who is waiting for a miracle. And that miracle might come through you. You may be the lifeline heaven is extending to them. You may be the vessel through which God's love flows. You may be the answer to the very prayer they whispered through tears. So I ask you, not with volume, but with weight, are you listening? Let us walk away not merely inspired, but transformed. Let us become stewards of the whisper, sensitive to divine nudges, responsive to sacred assignments, and courageous enough to act when called. Because when God whispers their name in your heart, he is also whispering your name in theirs. And when both hearts respond, heaven touches earth. Thank you